Hello, folks. My name is Bill Clay, also known as the Bible mechanic, aka the wordologist. And today we're coming to you via a live stream. That's if all goes well, folks. And the purpose of this particular segment is to let you know what we're doing. My friend Joe Wojcicki and myself are working together on a project that specifically involves a SCANA and the South Carolina Electric and Gas Corporation. What we hope to do is to bring you folks information specifically about SCANA, what's going on in the South Carolina legislature with our politicians, government, and so forth and so on. But in addition to that is to broaden out at times to other areas, such as the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and even the state of South Carolina Constitution. Folks, there's too much apathy and too much complacency going on within America. And believe me, I totally understand what's going on. I've been dealing with this for many, many years, just as my buddy Joe has, and you'll be hearing from Joe a little later on also. So we're going to try to be the people's voice on a fraud, actually a multi-billion-dollar fraud that's been going on since 2008. Now, that may seem like a long time, 10 years to be exact, but I can even date it back to 1988, folks. So this is going to be the general gist of what Joe and myself are attempting to do on Bill and Joe's TV.
Kevin Marsh. Check how much he's stolen from South Carolina electric and gas customers.
Thoughtfully and prudently wasted $2.2 billion.
I don't believe so.
So you're saying that $2.2 billion hasn't been wasted?
Prudence to me is, did you make the right decision based on what you had available at that time? Based on what we had available at that time, I believe we made a prudent decision. And I believe we're making a prudent one now to stop.
Has $2.2 billion been wasted?
It will not result in power being generated there.
So I'm sorry that I have to keep asking this question more pointedly. Will there be any benefit from the net $2.2 billion invested in that site?
No.
So your argument is, and this is what I'm trying to explain, and it is stunning. Your argument is that we have thoughtfully and prudently, over an extended period of time, wasted $2.2 billion. And this is the crux of the matter. More importantly, and let's be very clear about this, is the idea of accountability. You have linemen who are out eating in restaurants where they are accosted by the public over the perception of this. You have linemen almost getting in fistfights. They've had nothing to do with this. Yet these are the same guys that if they put on the wrong gloves are suspended for 5 days without pay. You will take away $1,200 from a guy who makes $60,000 a year over a simple mistake that really may have no cost. But y'all have security to get here? I mean, I can't understand the fog that has descended on y'all, because I know that y'all are good, thoughtful people. I really do. Your frontline employees are bearing the cost of this. You demand accountability from them. But you sit here and tell me that you have thoughtfully and prudently wasted $2.2 billion? Now let's ask for the accountability. Has anyone lost their bonus over this in management? Has anyone other than some contract employees and 2 nuclear power execs in Fairfield lost their job? My question is, how is this acceptable? Walk me through, at $2.2 billion, if I remember correctly, y'all have about 700,000 ratepayers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You have assessed a fee of $3,000 per ratepayer. 2.2 billion, I think, divided by 700,000 is about $3,000 a person, right?
Right.
You have cost people that don't have net worth $3,000. And you're telling me that you couldn't have made a different decision?
How much was stolen? Years of SCANA fraud and months of deliberation. Welcome to our chat. Give us materials to the next session, please. Who are the victims of SCANA's crimes? Are you on this list? Victims, are you children here? Victims, are you friends here? Victims, are you employer here? Can one angry hero make a citizen arrest of the 7 commissioners? This is a good question. Are you parents here? Waiting for material for viewers. Check links for next session, date and time. What the deal just for 5%?
Quite honestly, folks, I'm an old timer. I'm an old fogey, and so is Joe Wojcicki. But there's a lot of things that are old, but still relevant for today. Now, I'm going to try to give you some examples of what I'm talking about, folks, with regards to SCANA. But these precepts and principles, they go a lot further than SCANA, South Carolina Electric and Gas, and even the state of South Carolina. For example, there's an old biblical principle that's found in the book of Exodus. And it states, and I don't have the exact verse number at my hand right now, but it states, "Thou shalt not steal." And there's another commandment, and let me just reach in the back here. And there's another commandment, you could call it a law, an ordinance, a statute. In other words, there's a lot of synonyms that could be used. For example, I just stated, "Thou shalt not steal." That's found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 15. Now, that principle applies to people and businesses, corporations, limited liability corporations, private enterprises. In other words, that particular commandment, law, however you want to call it, applies to a lot of things. Thou shalt not steal. Now, there's another one that directly applies to SCANA per se, and it's thou shalt not kill. Now, That one can be found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. But that gets a little more technical. You see, folks, there's a difference between killing and murdering. In other words, they've killed the SCANA project. In other words, they want to pass the cost of that onto the consumers. So it's really not a strict translation or interpretation of the word "thou shalt not kill," more specifically the word "kill," but nevertheless, using American slang, that's exactly what they've done. They've killed the project, and now this government, the politicians, are debating what they should do with the project. Should they sell it? It's a big mess, folks. It's a real big mess. But the one that really applies and is more directly applicable here is also found in Exodus chapter 20. And this one goes far beyond SCANA. It states in verse 16, "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor." Well, again, in a manner of speaking, all of the customers of South Carolina Electric and Gas are neighbors. Again, I'm using a slang word to apply a principle here about not bearing false witnesses. And that's exactly what has happened, folks, with the SCANA deal going way back to 2008. Now, my friend Joe, he has a lot more information and is a lot more, let me say, knowledgeable in this particular field. But if I could, Joe, maybe you'd like to make a couple little comments with regard to the killing and the stealing and bearing false witnesses against the neighbors. Would you do that, Joe?
You did this perfectly, and we have to go back probably to our project, which we want to go from SCANA Swamp, it is type of our Title II Dominions deals, because we need to give money back to the people they have been robbed by SCANA.
Well, one of the other things, and I've got an outline here, folks, in front of me. It's let me just back up a tad. Joe and I are two old fogies that are trying to learn and deal with some new stuff. Okay, new stuff being computers and computer programs and so forth and so on. And we're not professionals. So what you hear and what you see is what you're going to get. Meanwhile, we're going to try to improve and educate ourselves a little more as to what's going on. I just wanted to throw that in there with regards to this, our very, very first presentation and attempt at trying to teach an old dog new tricks, actually two old dogs new tricks. And again, I just mentioned before, folks, there's some old things that still hold true today. For example, this question needs to be asked as well as answered. Has South Carolina Electric and Gas and SCANA wasted $2.2 billion on a failed nuclear project? Now, bear in mind, this project is located down in Jenkinville. There is one reactor that is currently in use at the present time, and they wanted to build two more nuclear reactors. But there's something called a base load, which is a bunch of, and no disrespect to Joe, but it's a bunch of scientific mumbo jumbo. So let me explain what base load is using some plain old, good old American language and slang. And I think it'll make it a little more clear as to why Joe and I are putting together, again, this project, and this is the first one. So we're gonna improve on it, folks. But here we have a nuclear reactor that's located, if my memory serves me correctly, on the Broad River in the area, the general area of Columbia, South Carolina. Now, you need water to cool the nuclear reactors. Now, I live up in the northern part of the state. I'm about, maybe 80 miles north of Joe, and I'm up near the plant that's called Catawba, I think it is. It's located on the Catawba River. They use water to cool the reactors. So here's how it works, folks. The base load review that was presented to the quote-unquote alleged representatives excuse me while I clear my throat on that representative parts, folks. I kind of choke on that because they're really not representing us, and that's not merely my opinion, folks. That's a fact. Now, getting back to some facts. The Catawba plant uses Lake Wiley, they call it Lake Wiley water, it's actually the Catawba River, to cool their reactors. But down in Jenkinsville, there was a little problem. And what happens is that during the summertime, the level in the river drops down. And that means if there's not sufficient water, then there's not sufficient water to cool the reactors. Now here's a real practical application, folks. I worked out at a golf course, and the golf course had an irrigation system. Still does. And what they do is they draw water from the river in order to irrigate the golf course. And that is under the control, believe it or not, but it's under the control of what is now called Duke Energy. They used to come down and monitor how much water was being drawn out and how much was being used. But during the summertime, we had some problems. The water in the river, the level of the water, dropped down low enough where the primary pump station could not draw any water out of the river to irrigate the golf course. Well, that same idea, folks, holds true with what they were attempting to do down there on the Broad River. Now, what we had to do was we had an auxiliary pump where the pipe extended further out into the river. It was actually a cove per se, but it was still fed by the river. The level goes up and down. And then that auxiliary pump pumped water into the main pump station, and we were able to irrigate the course, not on a consistent basis, but on, off, to let it draw up. Now that's a real simple explanation of how the cooling system works, or should work, down there in Jenkinsville. But Joe knows a lot more about it. And Joe, have I made any erroneous calculations here, descriptions or anything like that? Or is that basically what the base load report was all about, is the amount of water that was in the river and then how much it would be able to sustain cooling the 3 reactors?
Base Load Review Act was created in 2007, and when you look at and read definition from this Review Act, you will find this is applied only and only to base load plants. And the reactors can be only running 265 days per year, as this is definition of base load, if they have cooling water. Bill give you information from the Catawba River, and by the way, sometimes in the time, I believe there was maybe 2010, our governor, present governor, he was at this time prosecutor, and he was working on the Catawba River. So he's supposed to know exactly what is the problem with the water. So this is just the information that if you don't have field definition of the base load for the plan, which means 365 days all the time running, and they have cooling for this one, you cannot apply Base Load Review Act. If you cannot apply Base Load Review Act, you have no right to charge the people, the ratepayers of South Carolina Electric and Gas and other people from other So again, this is the basic error was happened in 2008. The Public Service Commission is started to use the Base Load Review Act without reviewing that the project is not going to be base load.
So it kind of goes back to one of the old commandments from the Bible, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And in essence, to bring it up to date, somebody lied. Somebody presented some false information. Now, here's what I mean by false information. Joe just stated that the plant needs to run 365 days a year, but there's only enough water flow to let it run 265 days a year. Well, that's exactly the problem that we had out at the golf course using a very similar system. Of course, you don't water the golf course in the wintertime, but nonetheless, during the summertime, when the river level dropped and it was really low, and we had to put in and use our auxiliary pump, then it became a major problem, because even then with the auxiliary pump, there was not enough water being pumped into our main irrigation system in order to irrigate the golf course the way it should be done. Now, that's about as close as I can come, folks, to explaining to you in plain good old American language the principle that was violated by not reviewing the base load report that was given to the politicians, SCANA, South Carolina Electric and Gas, and whoever else was involved in this project. So, going back to what Joe mentioned again, there's another commandment, a real old one, folks. Thou shalt not steal comes into effect. Yet that's exactly what the politicians and the representatives, alleged representatives, because most of them folks do not represent we the people. That's not a theory, that's not an opinion, that's a fact, which I can prove very, very easily, but maybe that'll be the subject of another slideshow presentation. So here we have two commandments that are being violated. Let's look at the third one. Thou shalt not kill. Well, they quote-unquote killed the project per se. In other words, there's no construction being done. Everything's come to a grinding halt. People have lost their jobs. I mean, there's a whole fiasco going on. They killed the project. But now, folks, the state has to decide whether they're going to sell it, run it themselves. So here's the bottom line. That plant, the failure of it, is going to kill you. No, I don't mean literally and I don't mean physically, but it's going to hit you right smack dab in the pocketbook or the wallet where it's going to hurt the most. Everything is going up, folks. The cost of everything is going up. But if you take into consideration two words that are not used anymore in the American language, if you take in the words and use the words proportion and ratio, I'd be willing to bet you dollars to donuts that your salary hasn't increased at the same rate that your electric bill and all the other things that you have to pay for has gone up. I mean, I remember now, I told you, I'm an old fogey. I was actually born before World War II started. I was born in May of 1941. Joe's a little older than me. I don't remember what year he was born, doesn't make any difference because Joe emigrated to this country back in 1986. So you have a very unique combination here, folks. Two old fogies. One that was born here in the United States of America, and another individual that was born over in Poland, I believe it was. Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was Poland, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I got that part right. But Joe emigrated in 1986. So just like I remember what America was like in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, so does Joe remember what it was like over in Poland in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. And Joe's knowledge and what he learned and what he saw, you're not going to learn in some book, because just like Joe, I'm a nobody also. We're just like two little grains of sand on the old beach down there in South Carolina called Myrtle Beach. We're just two little grains of sand. We're obscure. And this goes back to the apathy and the complacency which far too many Americans have nowadays, but especially here in the state of South Carolina. So we've taken three old principles: don't steal, don't kill, and don't bear false witness. In other words, don't tell lies, to the American public. But yet, that's what the politicians, by and large, do. They tell you what you want to hear. We're going to tell you what you need to hear. And that's the whole reason why Joe and I are starting up this little project. Joe is the producer. I call him a button pusher. And I'm the voice. Now, you'll find out that Joe still has a pretty heavy Polish accent, and at times he is somewhat difficult to understand. It's not a slam against Joe. We've talked about this before. And in fact, he's even told me, Joe, why did you tell me about being the voice, per se? Do you remember what you told me?
I think right now we're just moving a little bit from the topic we need to cover. So we're talking a lot, and really your voice is much stronger than everybody else. So for this reason, I ask you to present the kind of material, and we're going to cover probably this material in next maybe even 20 session, because it's very many things to tell the people. And what is also very, very important to us, to get inputs like the story maybe they have to bring to our TV channel, Bill and Joe TV. Maybe this is going to something is to share with the other people. Also some kind of suggestion and maybe comments and the critics, because we're going to listen to you like you maybe still listening to us, and we're going to make another session much more informative and as close as possible to the life. What is going to happen in a few weeks, months with the situation right now? You are just using a word politician. I would like to use it public servant. The public servants right now are talking, it seems like they want to correct this kind of situation, but they are talking is almost a 6 months, but still people do not receive the money. They had to receive the money, and of course the number of returns must be also cover some kind of punitive damage, because the SCANA was just a criminal cartel. We have to use this word using lately by President Donald Trump.
Well, I'd like to get back to something else, Joe, that I had mentioned about sometimes you're hard to understand, and that's not meant as a slam at all, folks, and Joe knows that. But Joe's gone to some of these Public Service Committee hearings, and there were times where he was denied access or the ability to speak. A lot of reasons why that took place. But nonetheless, that's exactly what happened at some of these meetings. And then, of course, they'll use all sorts of legal mumbo jumbo as to why he couldn't speak at these meetings. And then they cut other people short. They wouldn't allow him to speak. So let me tell you a fact of life, folks, all right? You're not going to solve problems in 5 minutes. It's going to take a lot longer than that. And that's one of the reasons why Joe and I decided to get together and try to put together this project. The sessions are going to be fairly short. I would probably venture a guess and say about 30 minutes. And the reason I say 30 minutes is because nowadays the society and culture of America get bored very easily. Now, you're welcome to comment on that. We'll have some sort of a place set up where you can, comment, give us your input, your takes, what you think should be covered, what should be discussed. In other words, folks, this whole set of a slide presentation, that's what I'll call it for now, but the whole idea of this project, by and large, is to get you involved and supply you with the best possible and most accurate information that Joe and I have at our fingertips. This is not a project for just myself and Joe. This is a project for you folks. In the U.S. Constitution, it's the first 3 words: we the people. And the people are part of the consumer base for SCANA and South Carolina Electric and Gas. Again, this is our first presentation. We're still getting used to figuring out how stuff works, and it's not professional. But then again, folks, how far have the professionals gotten us? Have they solved many of these problems, or are they still debating the problems and the issues? So, folks, until the next time, I hope you've enjoyed this. Please feel free to send your comments and any suggestions, and I'm sure Joe will have something up there. He's the button pusher. I'm the talker. He likes to type. I don't. So until the next time, folks, you all take care. I hope you do come back and visit us once again, and we'll be posting programs at a fairly consistent pace. Again, we're still working the bugs and the kinks out. So until the next time, folks, this is Bill Clade, and on behalf of Mr. Joe Wojcicki, saying take care, God bless, and hope to hear from you.
Thank you, Bob, for your strong voice. Thank you, Susan Wojcicki, YouTube CEO, whose father was born in Poland. She pronounced our last name as Poles do. And she let us to open this TV for you guys. Thank you, American social media, for the hope you brought to us by another fight fake news and stupidity. Thank you, my American students, for the satisfaction to be a teacher for 15 years in South Carolina Technical College system. Your wisdom and energy are the future in the country and hope for us, the people. Thank you, my friends from Facebook, for your likes, thumb up, and comments. Thank you, my friends, musicians. Give us some of your work to share, so make our shows much more colorful, because this first one is just a black and white. Thank you, our viewers. So please watch the record we're going to do right now, and thanks. And finally, thank God in America for my grand and grandchildren. Joe, the electrician. See you soon.